Imagine spending 27 years in prison for a crime you didn't commit. That was Joyce Watkins' reality. But through it all, Joyce never gave up her agency. In this episode, I talk with Jason Gichner, Executive Director of the Tennessee Innocence Project, about how they fought alongside Joyce to clear her name, what her story teaches us about resilience, and how agency, even when everything else is stripped away, remains our greatest power. Joyce's fight to reclaim her name is a profound reminder of why protecting your voice in every area of life matters. Welcome to the Death Readiness Podcast. This is not your dad's estate planning podcast. I'm Jill Mastriani, former estate attorney, current realist, and your guide through wills, trusts, probate, and the conversations no one wants to have. If your Google search history includes, "Do I need a trust?" What exactly is probate? And am I supposed to do something with mom's will? You're in the right place. I first met today's guest, Jason Gichner, when we started at the same law firm early in our careers. He had been a public defender. I was fresh out of law school. We were both just beginning in trusts and estates. We worked across the hall from each other, ordered Jet's Pizza when we stayed late, and even raced each other on the trails of Percy Warner Park. But what I remember most about Jason is a moment that had nothing to do with deadlines or court filings. We were at a hospice together, helping a woman on her deathbed finalize her estate planning. She hadn't gotten around to it. Life had gotten in the way, and now she was out of time. One of her children had special needs, and these documents were the only way to make sure both children would be cared for as she intended. When we walked into her room, Jason went straight to her bedside, calm and kind, and said, "Your nails look beautiful." Someone had just painted them for her. It is that same compassion and commitment to protecting people's agency that stands out in my conversation with Jason today, who is now the Executive Director of the Tennessee Innocence Project. Here's my conversation with Jason. Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Jill. Thanks for having me.
So you are with the Tennessee Innocence Project. Can you give us just a short explanation of what that is and when it started, because it's fairly recent?
Sure. The Tennessee Innocence Project is a nonprofit law firm. We represent people who are actually innocent, people convicted of crimes that they did not commit, and we fight to get them out of prison. Our typical client has been in prison for decades for something that they didn't do. On average, our clients who have all been exonerated served more than 26 years in prison for crimes that they didn't commit. And we do other things besides direct litigation to get people out of prison. We do policy work. We do education. We are basically in the business of trying to prevent wrongful convictions and trying to do something about it after they happen. Now, Tennessee is one of the last states in the country to have an innocence organization. Our project was started in 2019. And there's often a misconception that people have heard of the Innocence Project, that we're one large umbrella organization. We're not.
It's state specific.
Correct. It's state specific, and we are an independent 501c3. Now, we have working relationships with other projects throughout the country, and we all help and support each other. But we are our own standalone project, and we are the only freestanding project doing innocence work across Tennessee.
Okay. We're going to talk about one specific case that you worked on, but just generally, how does a case come to you? How do you find out about a situation where there might be a person who's been wrongly convicted?
Most of the time, people just apply to us. We have our information in prisons all over the state of Tennessee, and there's an application process where people can write to us telling us that they were wrongfully convicted and asking us to look into their case. Now, it's a tiered approach before we ever decide to take somebody on. There's multiple levels to the application, and then we conduct a really thorough investigation before we agree to represent somebody. On average, it takes anywhere from 6 to 9 months for us to look into a case before we even agree to take somebody on as a client. So I'm not even talking about the amount of time it takes to handle their case, go to court, do all of those things. Just our background due diligence to decide whether we think it's a case we should take is a long process. We're effectively trying to answer two questions. Do we believe this person is innocent, and is there a legal pathway for us to do something about it? And if the answer to both of those is yes, then that's a candidate that we would take.
And the person we're going to talk about today, Joyce Watkins, she came to you a bit differently, not through the normal channels. How did you find out about her case?
So Joyce was actually a walk-in. We don't get a lot of walk-ins at the Tennessee Innocence Project. Most of our people have been serving decades and are in prison. Joyce was convicted in 1989 and was given a life sentence for a murder and rape that she didn't commit. After the service of 27 years, she paroled, and she got out of prison in 2015. Well, the Tennessee Innocence Project didn't even exist until 2019. So she shows up around 2020, early 2021, basically saying, hey, I was convicted of this rape and murder that I didn't commit. I want to clear my name. And it wasn't just a matter of clearing her name. Because of the type of crime she was convicted of, she was on the sex offender registry for the rest of her life. She was on parole. She was living under some really severe restrictions in terms of where she could live, what places she could visit, going out of state. She wasn't even allowed to go on the internet.
So was it surprising to you, though, based on her conviction and her unwavering assertion of her innocence, that she was even granted parole?
It was super surprising for a couple reasons. First of all, Joyce maintained her innocence the entire time. And normally when people parole, the parole board is looking for some level of contrition, right? Person to come in and say, I feel really bad. I'm sorry I did it, but I've learned and I'm a better person now. Well, that didn't happen with Joyce because Joyce's position all along was, I didn't do it. Now, she was a model inmate the entire time she was in prison. So independent of that, she would have been a good candidate. But the biggest thing that I think Joyce had going in her favor, and it took multiple parole hearings before she was paroled.
Okay.
But the victim in this case, who was a 4-year-old girl, her mother never believed Joyce did it and came to every one of Joyce's parole hearings to speak on her behalf and say, you've convicted somebody that didn't commit this crime. And she was adamant about that. And look, I think the victim's mother coming in and advocating for Joyce so passionately made a difference to the parole board.
So let's get back to what the crime was. You said she was convicted in 89, but was the alleged crime back in 1987?
Correct.
Okay. So what was she convicted of doing, and how did that circumstance even arise for her?
So I think it's important to know a little bit of background about Joyce before you even understand how she gets charged with this crime. Joyce is an adult at this point. She's in her late 30s when all of this stuff starts rolling around. She's living in Madison, Tennessee, which is basically Nashville. She has a full-time job. She's never been arrested for anything in her life. She owns her own home. She owns her own car. I mean, she's living a productive, successful life. She's just doing everything right. And she's got a boyfriend named Charlie who she works with. They've been working together for years at the same place. He is a widower and he has raised all of his children on his own. And him and Joyce have been dating for a period of time. They don't live together, but they've been in a serious boyfriend-girlfriend relationship for a long time. Charlie, much the same as Joyce, never been in trouble for anything in his life.
Okay.
Good guy. And Joyce has a great niece who's a 4-year-old little girl who's staying with a family member in Kentucky.
Brandy, right? Her name was Brandy?
Correct. And she's been staying there for a couple months. This wasn't atypical with this family. It was particularly over the summer, kids would go stay with their aunts, their uncles, their cousins. This little girl normally would live in Georgia with her mom, but was spending the summer in Fort Campbell with her great aunt in Kentucky. And this little girl had previously spent time at Joyce's house. This was kind of a typical thing.
Okay.
What was atypical was what was going on during that 2-month period. There is, what we know now, just a lot of really strange things that were happening. This girl had a series of injuries over that period of time, all sorts of strange behavior. At some point, an anonymous call is made saying that someone believed she was being abused based on seeing welts on her back when she went to get on the bus for camp. And she's never taken to a doctor. She's never taken to a hospital over this period of time. So we really just have sort of limited hearsay information about the problem.
Was there an investigation, though, at that time into her welfare?
Yeah. So when that call was made about the potential abuse, Family Services of Kentucky came out to the house where this little girl was staying to check on the situation. And the that the little girl was staying with said, oh, she's not here. She's back home with her mom in Georgia. That was a lie.
Okay.
Little girl was still there. That same family member followed up with the Kentucky Family Services about a week later and told them, oh, she went to the doctor with her mom. Everything's good. There's no problem. Again, all lies. So where Joyce gets dragged into this situation is that in July of 87, she starts getting calls from this family member in Kentucky who's her sister saying, hey, you need to come get the little girl. You need to come get her.
So Joyce's sister is watching 4-year-old Brandy in Kentucky.
Correct. And Joyce works full time. She doesn't have any children, so it's not as if she's got daycare set up in her house or anything like that. So she can't just leave her job in the middle of the week and come pick up this little girl.
Right.
So she says, no, I can't do that. But then as the week goes on, the calls get more and more frantic. And it becomes clear to Joyce at some point that there's a problem that I need to look into here. So she talks it over with the girl's mom who lives in Georgia and says, I'm just going to go get her. After work on Friday, I'll go get her. Now, her boyfriend, Charlie, who we talked about before, doesn't want Joyce driving back and forth to Kentucky in the dark by herself. So he says, I'll come along with you. So they go to Kentucky. They pick up the little girl. It's probably about 11 o'clock at night by the time they get there, and they bring her back to Nashville. So by the time they get to Nashville, it's 1 a.m, right around that time. And as Joyce is getting Brandy ready for bed and putting her in her pajamas, she sees that she has an injury. It's apparent to Joyce that there's some blood in the little girl's underwear. So Joyce does what any reasonable person would do. She calls the girl's mom right away. And it says, look, this is what I just saw. There's a problem here. How do you want me to handle this? And we know all that's true. It's verified by phone records and by the mom who had this conversation with Joyce. Mom says, well, put her to bed and I'll drive to Nashville and we'll figure this out in the morning. So Joyce puts her to bed. Next morning comes, mom's not there, and the little girl is just acting strange. It's clear to Joyce that something's wrong. Something's cognitively off with her. Joyce has another sister that lives down the road. She comes over, talks to the little girl and checks on her too. And they both are in agreement that something is off here. So mom's not there. Joyce says, well, I'm not waiting anymore. I'm bringing this girl to the hospital because I don't know what's going on. She's got vaginal bleeding. She's not acting right. By the time they get to the hospital and they start doing tests, they realize that this is a very serious situation. The girl has a subdural hematoma, which means she's got a bleed in her brain that's very serious. So the doctors immediately begin to focus on that as opposed to whatever the superficial vaginal injury is. You know, they're really just trying to save her life because she's got a brain bleed. And tragically, they're not able to do it. They do everything they can, but this little girl ends up passing away from this brain bleed that nobody has any clue at this point how it happened. You know, at this point, she's been with Joyce and Charlie for a total of 9 hours. Most of that time she's been asleep. And Joyce is the one who brought her to the hospital to get medical care.
And Charlie's just there to help out, really.
Charlie is stuck in this whole situation because he's Joyce's boyfriend. He wouldn't have even been there. He only went along with Joyce so she wouldn't have to drive in the dark. So initially, there's no focus on either one of them because nobody believes that they could have done anything. The little girl was with them for such a short period of time, and Joyce is the one who took her for care. And then things change after the autopsy is conducted.
So what was it in the autopsy that caused the focus to shift to Joyce and Charlie?
The team of husband and wife medical examiner who were working on this case, who, you know, have all sorts of issues. The husband subsequently was prosecuted by the Department of Health for botching a variety of autopsies and lost his medical license. His wife is no longer licensed to practice medicine in Tennessee. She reaches the conclusion that when I was looking at the brain slides, there was a particular cell I was looking for, which is called a histiocyte, which is a healing cell. And she says, because I didn't see that healing cell in the brain slide, that means that this is an acute injury. It had to have happened within this 9-hour window when this little girl was with Joyce or Charlie.
So if she had seen the histiocyte, then she says she would have known that healing had started and the injury had occurred prior to the time she was with Joyce.
Exactly right. So she makes this medical finding and then laser focus. Everything is on Joyce and Charlie. It had to have happened during that 9-hour window. And to the exclusion of all other theories, that's what the prosecution moves forward with.
So what happened to Joyce's sister in Kentucky? Did anybody care?
Nothing.
Okay.
I mean, she's spoken to very briefly, and says, I don't know anything about any of this. Little girl was fine. And that's kind of the end of it. They move forward with this medical theory, and the prosecutor takes the case to trial, and not only a trial argues that the medical proof shows that these two did it, but argues that, well, Joyce destroyed the evidence because when we collected the evidence at the crime scene, she washed the bed sheets, which is where we believe Charlie raped this little girl before they killed her. And because she washed those sheets, we can't get the DNA. There's no evidence of the blood, any of that stuff.
I guess what you'll say is that never happened, right? She never washed those bed sheets, but there was also no evidence that she washed the girl's underwear or any other part of what would have been considered evidence at that time.
Correct. So Joyce and Charlie cooperated every way they possibly could. They were interviewed numerous times by the police without counsel. They sat down for polygraphs. They let the police come in and photograph the scene, collect whatever evidence they wanted. They did everything they could possibly do to help the investigation. So fast forward to 2021, when we're working on this case.
Wait, before 2021, though, back during trial, Joyce probably knows things aren't going well based on what she's hearing in trial. Was she ever offered a plea deal?
She was. Joyce was offered a plea deal in the middle of trial. The prosecutor essentially took her in the hallway and said, look, if you'll just say that Charlie is the one who raped and killed this little girl, then you can have a 1-year sentence and just be done with this whole thing. And Joyce said, oh, well, I'm not sending an innocent man to prison for something he didn't do. Went back in the courtroom, took her life sentence.
Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to focus on that for a second.
Yeah. So, I mean, to jump ahead a little bit, what's crazy about that part of it is that Charlie's family never knew that happened. And for years after this, it's fair to say there was some resentment with Charlie's kids because they felt like our dad got dragged into this because he just went along for the ride, right? I mean, they had some resentment towards her for that. And then when we had the hearing in 2021 and they heard that story for the first time, it sort of all melted away. I mean, that was a pretty powerful moment in the courtroom. And she has a super close relationship with Charlie's son now. Because the one thing I didn't say is that Charlie tragically passed away in 2015 in prison from cancer before he ever got out. So he served 27 years as well, was also granted parole, died of cancer before he got out. And then we took his case along with Joyce's in order to clear his name for his family and for his kids.
So they were obviously both found guilty in the trial court. Did they ever appeal that conviction? Because both had always maintained their innocence. Am I right?
They did. They appealed it on multiple levels. They didn't get relief. Candidly, they should have gotten relief back in 1994 when the problem with the medical evidence started to come to light for the first time, and they just didn't.
But they did seek that post-conviction relief in 1994, and they were denied. They
did. I mean, they continued fighting the entire time. They never stopped. I mean, Joyce never stopped even when she got out, when she came to us. And, that's a pretty rare thing when somebody's out of prison and they finish their sentence to spend their time, their energy, still fighting to get their name cleared. Because it's a roller coaster. It's hard. I say all the time, it's a lot easier to put an innocent person in prison than it is to get them out. It's really hard to clear your name of a murder that you didn't commit after you've been convicted.
And at that time, she was paroled, but she was living as a registered sex offender. What kind of restrictions does that come with? I mean, on her life, even though she's no longer in prison?
She's restricted on where she can live, where she can go. I mean, she can't go basically anywhere where there's kids. She can't go to the mall. She can't give out candy on Halloween. She can't live within 1,000 feet of a school zone or a park or a daycare center. She can't go on the internet.
So she was still living in a prison, but outside of the prison walls.
Sure. She was out, but she wasn't free. She was severely limited in terms of the things she could do in her life.
So when you're seeking post-conviction relief, what are the avenues that you can take?
So there's basically two ways we can get cases back into court. We can reopen the post-conviction when there's new scientific evidence of innocence, or we can file something called an error coram nobis petition, which is usually based on non-scientific evidence. For instance, a videotape of somebody else committing the crime.
And that second part, the error coram nobis, that is new, right? Under Tennessee law, is it Public Chapter 282?
So the error coram nobis law isn't new, but the error coram nobis law was recently amended this past legislative session to expand people's rights in the instances when innocent people enter a guilty plea.
Okay, that's what I misunderstood. So previously, can you say again what that is and then
Sure.
as amended?
The statute prior to this amendment only allowed for people who had a jury trial to come into court with new non-scientific evidence of innocence, again, like a videotape.
Okay.
The change in the law creates a pathway even for people who have entered a guilty plea, if they have objective non-scientific evidence that proves they didn't do it, to have their case heard.
So previously, if an individual had entered a guilty plea, then they would not be subject to this relief, right?
Correct.
Okay. Before we get on a little bit to talk about Joyce's case, can you just talk briefly about why someone might have entered a guilty plea even though they're actually innocent?
So what I can tell you for a fact is that we know innocent people plead guilty to crimes that they didn't commit. We have a case that we worked on here. There was a DNA exoneration where a person pled guilty to a murder that they didn't commit and they were exonerated by DNA. And there's a lot of reasons why people choose to plead guilty to something they didn't do, which more often than not have to do with the leverage that exists within the system. So in this particular case, the police are telling this person, your DNA was found on the victim at the crime scene. And he's of the belief that if he goes to court, that's going to be the proof. Well, he knows that's not true, but he also knows that if a jury hears that, he's going to get convicted. So he can roll the dice, go to trial, believing that the jury is going to be told his DNA was found on the victim's body at the crime scene and get a life sentence. Or he can plead guilty to a lesser and take a 15-year sentence and serve that time.
Right.
Which is what he did. And then the proof comes out later that somebody else committed the crime, that somebody else's DNA was at the crime scene.
Okay.
And there are all sorts of other reasons why people choose to do this. And some of them have to do with economic leverages that exist within the system. Let's say you're charged with a drug crime. You know, if you get caught with a small amount of cocaine in Tennessee, it's presumed to be for resale, and you're facing 8 to 30 years in prison.
Wow.
A lot of times, somebody can be charged with that offense, and they get an offer to plead to a misdemeanor of simple possession, and they get 11 months and 29 days probation. Now, if they can't post their bond, even if they're totally innocent, even if they were charged with drugs that belong to somebody else, they might be sitting in custody for 2 years waiting to have a jury trial.
Right.
And then if they lose, they know they're going to prison for 8 years. So in that situation, a lot of people say, you know what, I'm just going to take that misdemeanor. I'm going to take that 1129, walk out of jail today, and just deal with that on my record. So there are a lot of reasons why people choose to plead guilty to stuff that they didn't do. The sad part is that jury trials aren't necessarily about the truth. Jury trials are about what people believe. And if the jury is going to believe you did it, whether that's the truth or not, people have to make rational decisions whether they want to put themselves in that position.
And you might be one of the few people uniquely qualified to speak on that, having been a public defender in Nashville.
Sure. And there's no question, anytime you put a case before a jury, you don't know what they're going to do. You know, throughout my career, I have seen juries do all sorts of things. I have seen juries convict people I believe should have been acquitted, and I've seen the reverse of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter how strong you believe your case is. When you put it in front of a jury, you are rolling the dice. You are taking a risk. You might do everything right, and it still may go wrong for you.
Right. Okay. So getting back to Joyce's case, how did you get her case reopened?
At the heart of Joyce's case, it's a medical case. You know, back to the issue that we spoke to before. What first pointed the finger at Joyce and Charlie was this issue with these cells, these healing cells that the medical examiner says, I know it happened during this brief period of time because I didn't see those. Well, when we went back through the file and we started researching the case, we could see that there had been other doctors that had given that pause, saying, we don't think this is a legitimate medical theory. So we dug into that and we started talking to experts. We started working with a woman named Adele Lewis, who's the chief medical examiner for the state of Tennessee. So she's the top forensic pathologist in the state who typically testifies for the prosecution, not the defense.
Okay.
And we started working with a pediatric neurologist at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. And we said, look at this evidence with us and tell us what you think. And what we were able to confirm right away is that this theory was just absolute junk. This histiocyte, this cell that this doctor was looking for, is not a cell that ever goes to that part of the brain. It wouldn't have been visible in 9 days, 9 hours, 9 weeks. That's just not a cell in that part of the brain. So the entire theory of the timing of the injury was 100% junk science.
And did the medical examiner who reviewed the case back in 1987, 1989, did she ever admit that she maybe had messed up?
So weirdly, at the hearing in 1994, she did admit that, oh yeah, my theory about that was wrong, but I didn't see this other cell that I also was looking for, which also was total junk and also made no sense. I mean, first of all, just put aside the fact that she's admitting that what she told the jury about the science was wrong and coming in with a brand new theory that has never been presented to a jury before.
So she's replacing one mistaken medical theory with another.
Correct. So these doctors come in and basically say, no, this is totally wrong. You can't date the injury by that. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And the other thing they did, which never was discussed at the trial back in, the 80s, was they looked at the vaginal injury and they saw all sorts of healing cells. And the prosecution's theory had always been that this was a sexual and physical assault that happened at the same time. And we could tell right away that the sexual assault or whatever it was that caused the vaginal injury happened days before Joyce and Charlie ever picked up this little girl. It was medically impossible that injury happened while she was with them.
Okay.
And then things start to unravel further. So we do a public records request to get a copy of the police file and the DA file back from the 80s, which weirdly you are entitled to after you've been convicted, but you're not entitled to when you're presumed innocent before you're convicted.
So you can't get a copy of the police file during your trial, but you can get it after you've been convicted of the crime?
Correct. What you can get prior to the trial is limited by discovery rules. Now, the state is still required to turn over exculpatory evidence. And what we found in that file is exculpatory evidence that had never been turned over. What we found in there spoke to this issue of the destruction of evidence, where the prosecution had argued that Joyce had washed the bed sheet in order to, conceal evidence of the rape. Just wasn't true. Their report from when the police come to the scene to gather evidence, the bed sheet is with all of the other evidence that they collected. It has not been washed. It is with the same dirty laundry where they collected everything else. They just chose not to collect it.
Which is consistent with the full cooperation that Charlie and Joyce stated that they had with the police department.
Exactly right. So what we have here is we have two people that are convicted based on a junk medical theory. We have objective science, which proves that the injury happened before the child was ever with them. And we have a prosecution arguing to the jury that she destroyed evidence, which is totally in contradiction to what the police file and their own evidence says, and also in contradiction to the cooperation they've given throughout the case. And then put on top of that, if you start to look closely at the arguments they make, the arguments are pretty disturbing, right? I mean, there's racial tropes, there's labeling these people monsters. These were good people, right? I mean, these were just regular folks who had never really had encounters with law enforcement, just living their lives, going to work, going to church, just good people. And this false narrative is put in front of the jury and is supported by false or just flat out wrong evidence. And that's how innocent people get convicted. It's this perfect storm of things that go wrong.
So throughout this whole process, you're working in conjunction at what might normally be an adversarial relationship, but maybe not so much in this case with the district attorney in Nashville?
Right. So every case that we work on, not just this one, we always bring it to the prosecutor's office before we file anything in the court. Our position is that innocence cases are different, right? These aren't political cases. They shouldn't be adversarial cases. If there's objective evidence that somebody is innocent, then it shouldn't be one side versus the other. It should be everybody working in unison to correct this really bad wrong that has happened. So we brought Joyce's case to the conviction review unit at the Davidson County District Attorney's Office. They have a unit that looks into wrongful convictions.
Not all district attorney's offices have that kind of conviction review unit. Am I right?
You're right. There's only two in Tennessee. There's one in Nashville and there's one in Memphis.
Okay.
And, we brought our findings and Joyce's case to them, and then they conduct their own independent investigation. We don't just take them something and they're like, oh, that sounds good.
Right.
They go out and talk to their own experts. They do their own independent analysis on what they think. And they reached the same exact conclusion we did. And Joyce sat down and cooperated with them and was interviewed. I should also point out, for what it's worth, since Joyce had been released from prison, I think she passed 9 polygraph tests. I mean, by this point in 2021, it was pretty obvious to anybody who looked at this that this was a wrongful conviction, that Joyce and Charlie went to prison for something they didn't do. So the prosecution agreed, and we jointly went back into court and presented the evidence and asked the judge to overturn the conviction, and that's what happened. So in 2021, in December, the convictions were overturned. At that point, when a conviction is overturned, it doesn't just go away. It kind of like starts over again. They're charged with these crimes again, and the state could choose to retry somebody if they wanted to.
Oh.
But the state, obviously believing that they were innocent, immediately dismissed all of the charges.
Okay.
And then in early 2022, the charges were all dismissed, and Joyce and Charlie were both exonerated for this rape and murder that they never committed.
So Joyce now, is she 75 or so?
78.
Okay, she's 78 now. She spent most of her life in prison. And then even when she was out of prison, which was 2015, is that correct? She had all sorts of restrictions on her, probably couldn't get a very good job as a registered sex offender. What does Tennessee do, if anything, to compensate her and also Charlie's family? Charlie died in prison for a crime he didn't commit.
So unfortunately, neither of them have ever been compensated for their wrongful conviction. There's a statute in Tennessee that pays up to $1 million for people who have been wrongfully convicted. But the process for obtaining compensation under that statute is practically impossible. I mean, Joyce has been petitioning to receive compensation under that statute since 2022. She had to go before the parole board and essentially retry her case again. The parole board unanimously determined that they believed she was innocent, and this process still has not played out in a way where she's gotten relief.
So what is the process specifically?
So it's not good enough that you're found innocent in the courtroom. After you've been judicially exonerated, you have to get something called a certificate of exoneration from the governor's office, which is like applying for a pardon, a really difficult thing to get. And it's not until you receive this certificate are you eligible under the law to petition the state of Tennessee for compensation.
So you're simply at that point, once you get that certificate, you are eligible to petition for compensation. You're not guaranteed any type of compensation.
Sure, but the hard part is actually getting the certificate. I mean, Joyce still is waiting to get that certificate, even though she was found innocent in the courthouse, and she then basically tried her case again in front of the Board of Parole that unanimously found her innocent again. And still nothing's happened.
So what did she submit and to whom in order to get this certificate?
You submit a petition for a certificate of exoneration to the governor's office. And then the process is you have to have a hearing before the parole board. The parole board then issues a non-binding recommendation to the governor.
And that's happened.
That has happened. And then the governor can choose to accept it, deny it, or do nothing. And it's been more than a year now.
It's been a do nothing so far?
So nothing's happened, right?
Okay. So let's say that she does get this certificate from the governor. What does she do next?
She files a petition with the Board of Claims seeking compensation for the time that she was in.
And who decides how much compensation she gets? You said it's up to $1 million per.
It's capped at $1 million per person, yeah. And for what it's worth, under the statute, I don't even know that Charlie's family is necessarily eligible for it, because the statute as currently written, the compensation statute, only applies to people who are wrongfully convicted, their surviving spouse, or their minor children. Well, Charlie passed away. His original wife, I told you, had passed years ago, and him and Joyce weren't married. And his children aren't minors anymore. And it's not retroactive to whether they were minors at the time of the wrongful conviction. For what it's worth, nobody's ever going to have minor children because these cases are all like 20 and 30 years old. It's unclear to me whether they'd be eligible or not. That's more of a civil question.
Have you ever had anyone receive compensation?
No. I know of situations in Tennessee where it has happened, but they're very limited. And there are no Tennessee Innocence Project clients who have received compensation through the state statute that provides compensation for wrongful convictions. We have multiple clients that have applied for compensation and have been in the process. They're all essentially still in the process.
A Tennessee state statute, how you're pursuing for compensation, Is it possible for someone to pursue, not through you, but a federal statute for compensation?
Not a well, you can file a lawsuit, right? So you can file a federal 1983 lawsuit, which is essentially deprivation of a federal right under the color of state law. So these are civil rights lawsuits, right? I was sent to prison for something I didn't do. So yeah, people can file those. You see those around the country a lot.
It costs money, right? You've got to hire an attorney and go file one.
You've got to hire an attorney. Most of the time, attorneys are going to do these on a contingency where they're going to take a portion of the recovery if they're successful. Those are challenging cases, even though a person's already been exonerated, even though it's been proven in court that they didn't do it. It's not as if you just walk into civil court and say, hey, look, I was found innocent on my criminal case. Give me a bunch of money. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
These are challenging cases. They take a long time. And historically in Tennessee, there are people who have recovered relief in those cases. There's not a lot of them. Tennessee is also not one of these states. Sometimes you see these settlements where, a state pays somebody $20 million because they went to prison for 30 years for something they didn't do. Nothing like that has ever happened in Tennessee. The lawsuits I've seen resolve in Tennessee, $1 million, a little more than $1 million, something like that. And we're talking about, decades of your life taken from you.
Do you know what Joyce did? What was the first thing she did after she was exonerated?
I don't know if it's the first thing she did, but I know what Joyce always told me what she wanted to do. So Joyce is a very religious person, a very family-oriented person, and she was never able, without restriction, to go visit her family members' grave sites. She had a ton of family, brothers and sisters that passed away while she was in prison. And most of them were buried in places like Georgia. And that was one of the first things she did. She went and visited them. She went and visited Brandy's gravesite, just stuff that she wasn't able to do, because she couldn't even leave the state without permission. And she was restricted about the time of day she was allowed to be out. It was very hard for her.
So Joyce and Charlie, obviously we've been talking about how they were wronged in this conversation, but they're not the only people wronged here. Still, we don't know who killed Brandy. And that person never served for that crime.
We don't even know what happened, right? We don't know if an individual did something to her. We don't know if she got into it with another child. She was living on an army base, right? So she was around all sorts of people that would have had access to her. We just don't know. And that's what's really hard in some of these cases, right? You go back and you try and rework a case from 35 years ago. In this case, the only reason we were able to help Joyce and Charlie is because we could medically prove that they didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole nother hurdle to try to go back and actually solve the crime and solve what happened. It's really hard to do that if you don't get it right the first time.
Yeah. What can people in the general public who maybe don't have a law degree, how can they contribute to the cause of the Tennessee Innocence Project?
So the first thing that I always tell people is that it's important to learn and talk about these stories. I think on some level, there's a misconception that innocent people get convicted of crimes, right? We don't want to believe that, right? We want to believe doctors are infallible. We want to believe that the criminal justice system gets it right. The bad guys go to jail, the good guys go home.
It feels better to think that.
It feels better, right? That would be better. What we need to keep in mind is that this is a system that's run by human beings. And there's going to be an error rate whenever there's human beings. There's going to be mistakes. Put aside the cases where there's malfeasance, right? Where there's a bad actor, where somebody did something wrong. People are just going to make honest mistakes who are trying hard. We're going to learn more about science 20 years from now than we know today. And we're going to figure out that we got things wrong that we thought were scientifically correct back then.
Right.
So I don't know what that error rate is, but let's say that error rate is 3%. If you have a system that's run by human beings and they're getting it right 97% of the time, you'd say, oh, that system's really working pretty well if they have a 97% accuracy rate. Well, at any given time in Tennessee, there's about 30,000 people locked up. So if we're getting it wrong 3% of the time and there's 30,000 people that are locked up, that's 900 people locked up for something that they didn't do. So that's always where I think people should start, right? If you want to help, if you want to be part of making this better, it's important to recognize that this is a real problem that exists. You can have a system that is still effectively working the way it's been set up to work, but within that system, we have a really big wrongful conviction problem.
Right.
Now, there are more direct and tangible ways that people can help. As I said earlier, we're a 501c3. So we are a nonprofit. The Tennessee Innocence Project represents every single client free of charge. We don't charge our clients, their families, a penny to do the work that we do. There's essentially nothing that we do that generates revenue. So
is there a link that I can include in the show notes where people can donate?
There is. You can go to our website, which is tninnocence.org. You can follow us on social media. We're on every social media platform. If you just look up the Tennessee Innocence Project, you'll find our various handles. But yeah, we have to raise every single dollar to do the work that we do. We have 2 offices, one in Nashville, one in Memphis. We have 5 full-time attorneys, and we cover the entire state of Tennessee. We get close to 200 applications a year. These cases can take years and a lot of money and a lot of resources to effectively litigate.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of people who apply to us that, we just get to their cases when we can, because we can't overextend ourselves to work these cases properly to get results. And since 2019, we've successfully exonerated 9 people who collectively served 237 years in prison for crimes they didn't commit.
Wow.
And we have more people we're representing all the time. And like I said earlier, we're also trying to get laws passed in Tennessee to make the system more just and to prevent wrongful convictions. So we're small but mighty. We try to punch above our weight. And while I don't think you should necessarily judge innocence organizations by the amount of exonerations that they have, there's no question that there's a direct correlation between boots on the ground doing the work and exonerations. As we have grown, as we have increased the size of our team, as we have put more people in courtrooms around the state, we've gotten more people out of prison.
So there's a direct correlation also between boots on the ground and funding for the Tennessee Innocence Project.
No doubt.
Okay.
Every dollar we raise goes back into the work, right? When we grow, we're either putting that directly into litigation costs, attorney costs, or one of the other things that we do is we believe that innocence work needs to be holistic, right? It can't just be we get people out of prison and then it's like, see you later. Transitioning back into society, whether you're guilty or innocent after decades of prison, is a really big mountain to climb. It's an added hurdle if you've got all this trauma that's unresolved for being locked up and taken away from your family for decades for something you didn't do. So we have a whole client services department where we have a social worker that works with our clients after they get out and helps them transition. And we have a community of exonerees that support each other and meet, and we do therapy sessions, and we help people with things like housing and benefits and voting rights, just all the stuff that our people need help with. Essentially, when you're a Tennessee Innocence Project client, you're kind of a client for life. Even after you get out, you're still very much part of our family, and we continue to help and represent however we can.
And you did mention to me in another conversation that there are some exonerees who want to do estate planning to make sure that what they have now goes to the people who they want to have it. Is there anybody that you work with specifically to help with that?
Yes. Shout out to Dotson Parker Bim and Caparella that does pro bono estate planning for our clients, which, as an aside, Jill and I used to work together at that law firm.
We met there. We worked across the hall from each other in the basement, which we like to refer to as the garden level.
That's right.
But that is where we first met. So yeah, I'm so glad that they're doing that much needed work. They're great estate planning attorneys regardless. So I'm glad that your clients are getting that level of expertise and service.
We are very grateful to them for doing that, as we are too. We have a lot of pro bono partners in the community, both law firms and not law firms, that believe in the work, believe in the mission, believe in our clients, and go out of their way free of charge to help with things like this. So probably most relevant for this podcast, but we're super grateful for the estate planning relationship we have with that firm.
Well, thank you, Jason. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks. It's been my pleasure.
Joyce's story is a powerful reminder that agency isn't just about planning for the future. It's about protecting your voice in every season of life, especially when the systems around you try to silence it. Jason, thank you for sharing your time, your expertise, and your compassion with us today, and for the work you and your team are doing every single day at the Tennessee Innocence Project. I encourage you to share Joyce's story and the work of the Tennessee Innocence Project with the people in your life. These conversations matter, and sharing them helps amplify the fight for justice. If you'd like to support their mission, helping people like Joyce reclaim their freedom and their agency, visit tninnocence.org. That's tninnocence.org. Every donation helps them continue this life-changing work. I'll include a link in the show notes. This is Death Readiness, real, messy, and yours to own. I'm Jill Mastriani, and I'm here to help you sort through it, especially when you don't know where to start.
Hi, I'm April, Jill's daughter. Thanks for listening to the Death Readiness Podcast. While my mom is an attorney, she's not your attorney. The Death Readiness Podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not provide legal advice. For legal guidance tailored to your unique situation, consult with a licensed attorney in your state. To learn more about the services my mom offers, visit deathreadiness.com.